Hi everybody, welcome and thank you for joining us. This is an edited introduction to the original video that was filmed. We just had a few technical issues, so we've just edited it to make it a bit more streamlined for your watching. First, I just want to introduce myself and RE-PEAT. So my name's Bethany and I'm part of the youth-led collective RE-PEAT. And we work to bring about a peatland paradigm shift. And for us, this really means changing the perception of peatlands from a landscape and ecosystem that's not valued or valued in purely economic terms to one that is valued more holistically and valued for its innate value. We work in three main directions. These are education, collaboration, and reimagining, and we try and bring these elements each time into our work and try and reflect all of our events and activities to these main directions. So hopefully that's visible for you through this series that we've created, the UK Anthology Series. This series follows on from our EU-PEAT anthology, where we collected and compiled different accounts of peatlands from across Europe. And we use this to try and influence the common agricultural policy so that a more environmentally friendly policy would be implemented, and one that specifically also dealt with peatlands. And now with the UK leaving the common agricultural policy as part of Brexit, they're really placed in quite a unique position where they can design their own. And we see now that the CAP has not gone far enough. And we find it a really critical moment now to try and push the UK to take steps further and to be more progressive in their approach to how we value peatlands as well as other ecosystems and the natural world across the UK. So this is why we wanted to do this series based around different issues and topics that interact with peatlands in the UK. Now, it's also a critical moment for the UK with the COP26 being held in Glasgow this year. And this really draws a lot of attention to the UK and what policies they are implementing, how true to their word they're staying, and really setting a good example for other countries around the world. And as a country with a lot of peatlands, one of the ways that the UK can really step up their environmental game is through protection, restoration, maintenance of peatlands. And what we also notice is that peatlands are getting a lot more traction in the media, and a lot of people are coming to realize how important peatlands are. But maybe the really wide scale understanding of all the different issues that interact with peatlands is still missing, and maybe a kind of more public understanding as well, or a collective understanding rather than kind of pockets here and there who really are pushing for peatlands to have a greater significance in environmental policies as well as across other areas. So this is why we really try to pull together all of these different issues to create this series. So that's the UK Anthology Series, and this is the first session of that. And this session, what you can expect is really just an introduction to peatlands from a lot of different angles. So we're going to start with an introduction to kind of the peatland formation and the scientific aspect of how peatlands form, and moving on to an understanding of how policy surrounding peatlands is at the moment in the UK and where we can go. And then we'll hear a little bit about the archaeological and heritage side of peatlands in the UK and in Ireland. And then finally, we'll hear a little bit from local bog restoration projects that are happening from across the UK. So we have people speaking to us from Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and England. So to hear about all the great work they're doing on the ground. So we're just going to start first with the explanation video I mentioned, and then the recording will revert back to the original version. And I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lucas and I'm going to explain to you what a peatland is and how it's formed. In essential terms, a peatland is a wetland ecosystem consisting primarily of dead and decaying organic matter. which mainly comes from plants, though all sorts of organisms have been preserved in them. Peatlands are hugely diverse and can form in a number of different conditions. This is why we see them in areas ranging from the boreal region, for example northern Canada and Iceland, to tropical ecosystems, particularly Indonesia, but also in similar latitudes in South America, Africa and other Pacific regions. It takes a long time for peat to form, although the rate varies. On average, around 1 millimetre of peat soil forms on a mire over the course of a year. Some peatlands have existed for many thousands of years, with the oldest known one being about 47,000 years old. Thanks to these, we have access to a huge and entirely natural historic archive, which can give us rich impressions of past climates and civilizations. Peatlands are classified in many different ways, primarily by the water source of the peatland and hence the nature of the nutrients and the water chemistry. Any peatland where peat is actively being formed can be called a mire, and bogs and fens are different types of mire, with deeper classifications within each of these types. Other soil terrains, which mainly consist of peat but which have been drained or degraded and are no longer actively forming peat, are still called peatlands, but instead of mires they are called histosols. For peat formation to be achieved, it's essential for organic matter to build up to be greater than the decay of dead material, and the presence of water is the best way of doing this.
This waterlogging makes plants have to adapt to these conditions. So the plants that grow in these ecosystems are completely different, but also the animals and even the microbial life in the soil are completely different. In terms of the carbon cycle, plants photosynthesize, and in photosynthesizing they draw down carbon from the atmosphere, and when they die, normally microbial processes would decompose that carbon and return that carbon onto the atmosphere. But in peatlands, there is not a balance between these two things, between photosynthesis and decomposition. But decomposition is slowed down because of lack of oxygen in the soil. And in slowing down, it allows peatland to accumulate carbon that has slowly accumulated over millennia. So this means that peatlands are a carbon sink. However, then humans come into the picture and we drain them. And when we drain them, all this carbon that has slowly accumulated over time can be released and can be released very rapidly. One example is the fires in Indonesia. We can release tons of carbon back into the atmosphere in a very small amount of time. This is obviously a problem. So it's very important that we are able to manage these ecosystems in a way that we preserve them as carbon sinks, if it's possible.
Peatlands are not only massive carbon storage containers of time and history, but peatlands are also of global significance for biodiversity, with the majority of peatland species and habitats rare, threatened or declining. By definition, biodiversity is the variability among living organisms from all sources, including terrestrial, marine and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are part. This includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. Being wet is vital for peatlands, but this also creates some extreme conditions for organisms to live in, including low oxygen content, high moisture levels, limited nutrient availability, and in most cases, higher acidity than other ecosystems. This leads to intense competition for space and nutrients between distinctive species. Many common peatland species have adapted strategies during evolution, such as vascular plants, who have developed mechanisms for toxin extraction, aerative tissues, and even insectivory as a special strategy for mineral uptake. Perfect example here is the famous round-leaf sundew, who is an insectivorous plant. The combination of rare fauna and flora living in and on peatlands are vitally important for peat formation. These rare ecosystems are threatened by several factors, including losing habitats, invading species, extraction of peat, land use change, and climate change. Thus, it is of utmost importance to protect and restore those ecosystems together with those plant species and animals that are assisting the regeneration of peatlands.
Another important benefit of peatlands is their potential to contribute to natural flood management. Flooding costs the UK economy over £1 billion a year, damaging homes, infrastructure, as well as having a devastating effect upon people's lives and livelihoods. Many peatlands occur in our hilly and mountainous areas, particularly in the UK, where around 10% of land surface is covered by blanket bog. There are several different types of peatlands, with blanket bogs occurring in our upland areas. They are called blanket bogs because they appear to cover or drape the uneven shape of our landscape, like a blanket, and it is these bogs that act as our first defence against flooding further downstream. Basically, peatlands act as a buffer to flooding, slowing the flow of rainwater in the upland of a catchment. Peatlands are famous for their water storing capabilities, with peat actually containing less solids and more liquids by weight than milk. A peatland may be compared to a wet sponge. Since a peatland's water table is generally close to the surface, they possess only a limited capacity for additional soil water storage. So a sudden storm will actually cause water to flow over the surface rather than be absorbed as is traditionally considered. So how do peatlands actually help then prevent flooding if they're already nearly saturated? Well, they do this by slowing the flow of rainwater over the land surface, by the rough surface that natural vegetation creates. A healthy peatland surface consists of a veritable mosaic of undulating vegetation, characterised by hummocks, tussocks and pools, and of course the famous sphagnum moss, rightfully celebrated for its ability to hold about 20 times its own weight in water. A damaged and degraded peatland will have much less diverse vegetation cover, frequently less sphagnum moss, and may even be characterised by areas of exposed bare peat soil. As the underlying peat soil dries and breaks down, it becomes even more compact and dense, losing its water-holding capacity. Degraded peat is also more easily eroded, which forms channels for rainwater to quickly enter rivers and streams, thus increasing the chances of flooding in the downstream river channels, as they cannot cope with the volume of water all at once. Revegetating peatlands and blocking drainage gullies were shown to reduce peak river flows by approximately half compared to unrestored sites. This occurred since the vegetation layer essentially increased surface roughness, slowing the flow of water. By reducing peatland cover through damaging activities such as heather burning, vegetation cutting and peatland soil drainage, we have inadvertently reduced their capacity of these ecosystems to prevent flooding further downstream. Globally, about 500,000 kilometres squared of peatlands have been damaged and degraded by human activity, blanket mires being amongst the most heavily damaged ecosystems in the UK.
The first communication of science happens within science, so scientists to other scientists, mainly in the form of these academic articles, which most people find really boring to read. A huge part of what makes science and art and this relationship so important is it's about bringing science back to the people, or science to the people. So science, I think, by only communicating or predominantly communicating to A, scientists, and B, other politicians, that is a very political action in itself. It means that the people with the science knowledge is a very small group of people. And so I see art as being a really critical component communicating the science. But I don't really like this phrase, communicating science, because to me it sounds very one way. It continues to have a hierarchical relationship when we follow that method, which for me as a scientist, I guess a huge component of science is not what the question is, but how is it that you answer it? And I think with science communication and perhaps science and art, whatever group it is, whether that be an indigenous group or a minority group or a less physically abled group or a queer group or whoever is sort of seeking the scientific knowledge needs to be part of also the communication process. And the second reason I think art and science is so valuable is the depth of content, because I think the traditional science communication methods, like the short snippets of science of like the Mars rover, the possibility of finding water on Europa, and I see the potential of art as really building a much stronger relationship between the receiver and the science itself. And I think it's really important, and it really brings a lot of value to our lives when we have this two-way perhaps care relationship, that we care for the science and we also feel that the science is caring for us, because that's the science is really there for the greater good of the beings on this planet.
I've been asked what's my favorite thing about Peatlands. I think my favorite thing, I love everything that has to do with Peatlands, but my favorite thing is the fact that to me they are wild ecosystems.
Then I will just give words to Matt Williams and Clifton Payne from IUCN to talk a little bit about policies in the UK regarding peatlands.
Cool, thanks Mary-Liz, and thanks very much for having me tonight. I'm going to kick off and then hand over to Clifton afterwards. Just to introduce myself quickly, my name's Matt Williams. I was up until quite recently chair of the NGO PEAT policy group. I'm currently climate and land program lead at something called the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit, although I'm speaking tonight just as an individual, not on behalf of any organization. And I've also been involved in youth environmental engagement work and activism for quite a few years as well, and worked with RE-PEAT Earth for around a year, I think, which has been great. We've done some cool stuff together over the past few months, which has been really good. So I'm really grateful for you having me tonight. I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. I haven't got anything complicated, but I have got a couple of slides. So I'm going to talk to you about peatlands policy, which it sounds like a lot of you might be pretty familiar with. I'm going to focus on the UK, and even more specifically, I'm going to focus primarily on policy in England, although I will touch on the other UK countries as well. And I've chatted with Clifton, and I think that our two talks complement each other nicely. So I've only got one slide. These are the sort of key messages that I'm going to run through this evening, but I'll go into detail on each of them. And just to kick off really at the top level, peatlands are going to play a crucial role in tackling both climate change and are vital for nature and for wildlife as well as providing important benefits like flood mitigation too. And I think, as was said, we all know what peatlands are. They're made up in large part of the peat soil that is their foundation, but above their surface they can also be incredible places for people to visit, homes to fantastic wildlife such as golden plover or the carnivorous sundew plant, and spectacular landscapes as well. The UK has 3 million hectares of peatland, which is around 12% of the world total, but only around 20% of these peatlands remain in a healthy, or what's called near natural state. And it's because of their age, and they've been forming for at least around 10,000 years, that the UK's peatlands have a lot to give in terms of carbon. So below the surface, they lock away around the equivalent of 20 years worth of the UK's entire annual emissions. But this carbon is currently being leaked into the atmosphere because we've put the carbon absorbing processes of peatlands into reverse gear and turned them into effectively what are pretty efficient greenhouse gas factories. And the UK's peatlands, and I'll return to this point shortly, release around the equivalent of 6% of the UK's economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions every year. So inaction will only lead to the ongoing and accelerating decline of our peatlands and increased emissions as a result. But peatland policy is probably going through one of its most significant periods of change in quite a long time. Peatlands have been swept up in the wider environmental policy ambition of the current UK government, and we're also benefiting from the extra leverage that we're getting this year from international events like COP26. And you could argue, or you might not, that the UK government is going through a peatland paradigm shift at the moment. So peatlands will be a key part of restoring biodiversity and nature in England. In 2018, the UK government launched the 25-year environment plan, setting out its ambitions, among others, to create or restore 500,000 hectares of habitat for nature outside existing protected areas, and also for all soils, and I don't know if they quite knew what they were writing at this point, to be sustainably managed by 2030, which, lucky for us, can be argued to cover peatland soils as well. They also set out to create a nature recovery network made up of local nature recovery strategies that cover every county in England. And the UK government has also said that it wants 30% of all land in the UK to be protected for nature by 2030, and claims that in England it is already at around 26%, which, if you look at lines on the map, it could be argued that it is through triple SIs and national parks and areas of outstanding natural beauty, many of which contain peatlands. But if you look on the ground at the quality of many of those areas, then you would see quite a different picture, and arguably we're a long way from 26% and even more so from 30%. Of course, many peatlands are protected areas like triple SIs, sites of special scientific interest, but in many cases are not being looked after properly. And many peatlands are outside those protected areas, and that can leave them at risk of threats as mundane as housing developments, which you would assume was sort of unthinkable on peatlands, but are still going ahead. And there was a story only last week about housing development threatening a peatland. The UK government also has big ambitions to increase tree cover in the UK, but it's really important, and I'm sure many of you are aware, that we avoid tree planting in the wrong place, particularly where it might be on peat soils, including shallow peat soils. And we also need to think about whether or not peat is being used in growing tree saplings to meet some of those tree planting targets. Peatlands are also, as we all know, going to be vital in terms of tackling climate change. The UK government, again, has recognised this through the creation of the £640 million Nature for Climate Fund, which will, alongside funding tree planting, fund the recovery of 35,000 hectares of peatland in England. As I said earlier, peatlands are a significant source of emissions, around 6% of the UK's total annual emissions, but have previously never been included in the UK's annual greenhouse gas accounts because we didn't have the science to estimate those emissions accurately enough. But the emissions from peatlands are big enough to take the UK's land use sector from being a net sink to being a net source of emissions, which creates a much stronger leverage or reason on the government to get a grip on those emissions, because we won't be able to meet our legally binding carbon budgets under the Climate Change Act or our net zero target for 2050 without tackling those emissions. Peatlands are also wrapped up in farming policy. So in England, 80% of all of those emissions from peatlands come not from the upland peatlands, which have arguably had much more of the funding and attention over recent decades, but from peatlands in the lowlands. And this photo that you can see is from a lowland peatland area, that's from Wicken Fen in Cambridgeshire. The new agricultural system in England will reward farmers for delivering environmental outcomes, and that could in part help better management of peatland soils where those are farmed. The government has also established what's called a lowland peat agricultural task force, or task forces in fact. There are several of them in different bits of the country, which are looking at ways that lowland peatland soils can either be turned over to wetland agriculture, taken out of production entirely in places like Wicken Fen where they're restored to nature, or where production might need to continue in the most sustainable way possible. the lowland peatland soils in England are also some of the most productive in terms of agricultural produce, particularly fruit and vegetables, which we all need to be eating a lot more of. So they're a quite tricky problem to tackle. Peat also plays a big role in lots of gardens, and in the UK, we still, according to the figures that were released last October, use around 2 million cubic meters of peat every year in compost, most of that imported from Ireland and from European countries. That is down marginally over the last few years, but the retail, so the gardening sector, that's your home bases and garden centres, and professional horticultural industry are nowhere near phasing it out. Back in 2012, the government set voluntary targets for those industries, but the voluntary target for 2020 for the retail sector has been missed by quite a long way, and the voluntary target for the professional sector for 2030 will also be missed by a long way at the current rates of decline of peat compost use. When I was working with NGOs back in October, we did a media push on this, got quite a few stories, in part thanks to a quote for our press release from Monty Don. And it's great to see this last weekend that peat-free compost is now just part of the normal vocabulary on Gardener's World that Monty Don presents. But what we also managed was we forced a statement from one of the ministers at DEFRA, which was a quote in a press release a few weeks later that said that a ban or something similar to it would be on the way. And we're now expecting the government to potentially consult on extra measures that will bring about an end to the use of peat in compost. But I think those who want to see an end to the use of peat in compost will have a fight on their hands, as the industry will probably push for ongoing monitoring and voluntary action as opposed to any mandatory measures to phase it out. The other issue that I've worked a lot on with NGOs is, of course, the burning of peatlands. In England in the last few weeks, we've seen a licensing system introduced. I've stopped referring to it as a ban because it's so full of loopholes that I don't really think you can call it a ban. So it's only in protected areas, and about half of peatlands are not in protected areas. It's not on slopes or on rocky ground. It's not on a day of the week that includes an E. You get the picture. We need this ban to be far more comprehensive, and we need to avoid letting government off the hook. And particularly with COP26 around the corner in November, when the peat burning season will be back, I think we can do a lot to point to burning going on England's peatlands just south of the border, while COP26 is occurring just north of the border in Glasgow. And finally, peatlands are not yet covered by a single policy framework, but in England at least, they are about to be, with the long overdue release of the England Peat Strategy, which we've been promised since December 2018, so it's currently more than 2 years late. But we do think it might be coming out in April, May, finally. Some NGOs and other stakeholders were sent an initial document and a survey back in August last year, which I think it's fair to say we were quite underwhelmed by. So we're holding our breath, or perhaps not holding our breath, for what's coming in the next few weeks. And in Northern Ireland and Wales, there are peat strategies in the pipeline too, although they're a bit further behind than the England one. So I think it's fair to say, to conclude, that 2021 may be a great year for peatlands, but there's still a lot left to win, and the publication of the strategy for England will lead potentially to some consultations on further measures. And as you can see, there's a huge different range of policy areas that affect peatlands, so it's a pretty complex picture. And that's my contact details, which I'll also put in the chat if you want to get in touch with me. But I can't stay for the whole session tonight, unfortunately. So if you've got any questions, do feel free to follow up afterwards. And now I'll hand, I think, straight over to Clifton.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Bethan and Marie, for inviting me here. So the role I cover is I was director of the IUCN UK Peatland programme, which formed in 2009, and I've now taken on the role as policy advisor to that program, and we've got a team of 5 people that are managing that work. The IUCN Peatland program is a partnership body. It's a partnership of government and environmental NGOs, and that's quite an important mixture. It gets things done. It's not just a campaign body. It's there working with government, and this is the IUCN is the world's largest nature conservation body around the world, and it works on this principle of partnership between government and NGOs. So we fit within that umbrella of the IUCN here in the UK. The big policy issues, Matt's covered some of the key ones. What I wanted to reflect on are some of the most urgent policy issues facing us now. It's fair to say that we have seen a huge change in attitudes to peatlands in the last 10 years. And the UK is leading the world in its approach to peatlands. It's still not perfect, but it's certainly put in place measures that other countries are really respecting, and hopefully we can see replicated around the world. Don't forget, 170 countries across the world have peatlands, and those that don't have peatlands just haven't found them yet. So what we do on peatlands here in the UK matters to every other country in the world. The biggest policy challenge is the fact that for centuries, peatlands were only valuable to the landowners if they were drained or destroyed. They were of no use to landowners in their wet, natural condition. This isn't something that is true in the furthest back history. If you go back over 500 years and back thousands of years, people valued the peatlands. They were vital. Bronze Age communities and right up to the medieval period, people used the peatlands for hunting, for fishing, for religious purposes back in the Bronze Age, and many of the bog bodies were actually offerings to the deities. But around 500 years, 400 years ago, we had a change of attitude, and the agricultural reform meant the only good bog was a drained bog. And this was an attitude that has sadly pervaded right through to modern times, where landowners only make money if the bog is drained and managed for agriculture, either for crops or for grazing livestock. And that's the thing we have to turn around. So over the last 10 years, what we have seen progress with is repairing the damage to peatlands. 80% of our peatlands are in a damaged state because of the past drainage, and we've had fantastic projects, world-leading examples of restoration projects, hundreds of them, literally hundreds of projects, restoring peatlands, re-wetting them, and bringing back all the valuable functions that peatlands provide. And the government has been putting a lot of money into that. We've had just announced yesterday in Scotland, 22 million next year for, or this coming year, for peatland restoration. Similar large sums of money being made available from the governments in the rest of the UK, with DEFRA announcing projects for restoration. You've got private companies, the private water companies in England, paying millions for peatland restoration because it's cheaper to repair the bog than to treat the brown water that's coming off the bog in a damaged bog. That's great. Repairing and restoring peatlands is essential, but then what? If a landowner is faced with a peatland that's been repaired, re-wetted, and it's of no use to them, they're not going to love it. They're not going to cherish it. They're constantly going to be looking for ways to turn it into something else. So we have to make this huge shift where the value of peatlands to society that we now appreciate sees some recompense for the landowner. So the landowner is making money from a healthy peatland, reflecting the benefits to society. Now that can either come from government grants in the form of payments for agriculture. So instead of being paid to raise sheep or have crops, you're paid for the carbon, the water, the biodiversity benefits of peatlands. We could bring, and we must bring in, the private sector. The business sector recognizes that climate change affects their business just like anything else. If they put money into helping repair peatlands, it's helping their own bottom line. It's not just some sort of nice social thing, it's actually helping the economy of the country. So we want to see mechanisms such as the Peatland Code that we operate, which allows businesses to pay private landowners for the peatland benefits. And we think that should be done jointly with a government grant scheme across the UK, with each government making payments available to land managers for healthy and for recovering peatlands. The other key message is we've got to step up our efforts. We've done well, we've restored vast areas of peatland, but considering just how badly damaged they are and the timetable we've got to tackle climate change, we really need to step up a gear. You heard from Matt that we have targets for 2030, we've got net zero carbon targets, we've got biodiversity objectives. We produced the UK Peatland strategy, which set a target for 2 million hectares of peatlands to be in a good or recovering condition by 2040. We're not far away, and we've only done half the job by our best calculations. So stepping up. Now, partly that requires more money, but the other thing is it requires capacity. Have we got enough trained staff, trained advisors to the farmers, trained digger drivers to help repair the peatlands? Do we have all of the partnerships in place to help bring together, often over, people have to be brought together over thousands of hectares, different landowners? That coordination takes partnerships, and it takes organised bodies such as Moors for the Future, Yorkshire Peat Partnership, North Pennines AONB. These partnerships help deliver action on the ground, and without them, just having the government money won't see any progress. So we need that coordination and that effort, and we need the training and education so that we get the next generation of peatland managers who understand peatlands and know how to look after them. The big shift that Matt talked about from our focus on the uplands to the lowlands, I don't like to think of it as a refocus, it's an expanded effort. We haven't finished in the uplands, and yes, the lowlands in England may be emitting more carbon from the drained agriculture peatlands in the lowlands than is coming from the uplands, but the uplands are a much bigger carbon store. They're very much deeper peats, and if we don't look after them, there's an awful lot more carbon to go into the atmosphere. So we need both the uplands and the lowlands, but the effort in the lowlands is going to be challenging. The land is very much more valuable for the crops, and so any compensation, if you like, to the farmers is going to have to be a lot higher. So the solution perhaps there is encouraging people not just to be traditional dry crop farmers such as your wheat and other things. It's encouraging them to become a new generation of wet farmers, growing things, growing food even that is dependent on wet soils, and that way we see the peatlands holding their carbon. We even have opportunities for growing sphagnum, which can then be used in the horticulture industry instead of peat, keeping the peatlands wet and gently harvesting that sphagnum to provide material for the horticulture industry. So there are new industries, new farming methods available that we need to really ramp up in these lowland areas. The final thing I really wanted to cover was the conflicting policies. As people start to wake up to the threat of climate change, we start to see big measures coming in place to tackle it. But often these big measures conflict with each other. So we've got huge tree planting targets, we've got vast expansion in our wind farms and renewable energy. The trouble is, peatlands, because they were deemed worthless, are often the places that people want to put these developments because the land is cheaper and it's easier for the wind farm companies to go on to the peat bogs or to plant trees in these areas rather than to go on to the farmland. But it's a complete nonsense of a policy to have one climate change action undermining another climate change action. We need every tool in the box to tackle this threat. So we need trees in the right place away from the peatlands. We need wind farms in the right place away from the peatlands so that you get the benefits of all three, trees, wind farms and peat. And having planning policy that properly directs and encourages these developments off the peatland is essential, and to stop seeing peatlands as the easy place to be dumping all our renewable and other climate change activities. And then the final thing really is policy and strategies aren't the most exciting thing. They are really important. They are what makes the world tick, and it's what makes government finance available, is having the proper strategies in the place and having targets and having coordinated effort across all the government departments. But on top of that, you need to bring the public on side. We're coming through a pandemic. There's huge economic stress. People need to know that their money's being spent wisely. And let's be frank, people don't see naturally the goodness of peatlands in the way that we do. And we need to bring that audience on side. And that's why I love the sort of range of art, music, poetry, anything that engages people with peatlands is essential to help them understand that it's right that the government spends their hard-earned tax on restoring and looking after peatlands. So policy and engaging people and motivating people to enjoy these peatlands and to appreciate that they're being protected and looked after. I'll leave it as that. Thanks.
Thank you, Clifton, for the talk, and Matt as well, and thank you for finishing on such a nice note. Let's see. Yeah, if anyone has questions, I would like to leave like the bigger discussion questions in the end, but if someone has some quick questions, like Kieran is asking, what's your opinion on wind turbines placed on wet peatlands?
Do you want me to answer that, Marie?
Yes, maybe like a quick question.
Well, just to say that the construction of a wind farm involves tracks, and it involves big concrete turbine bases that in effect drain the peatland. So it's very hard to build a wind farm on a wet peatland. Peat is 90% water, and any engineer trying to dig into water, it just creates a mess. And we've seen some horrendous examples of this. So it's not easy, and it's not the solution. We shouldn't have wind farms on peatland at all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both very much for joining us and for giving us a really nice overview. We are gonna have a quick interlude or a short session now. We have Elizabeth Jane Burnett, who couldn't be here with us today, but she's a poet and writing beautiful poems also about peatlands. So she sent us over an audio, and Bethany's gonna try to play it. Let's hope it works better than the video. Yes. And then we have Jamie, who is also gonna read some of his poems. So that's me.
Yes, let's see if I can be friends with the audio this time. I've also put the image just here so you can also read along. This is a copy that was included in the UK Anthology that I was talking about earlier. Yeah, unmute yourselves and yell if you don't hear. Let's have a go.
Sphagnum palustra, blunt-leaved bog moss. Baby's breath, lamb's bleat, little peach, sleek of pulp and feet. Cream, loud pealing of bells, dream, pillow of plants, gleam the grass together, stitch. Branches tether leaves, no sleeves, a narrow, taper, candles breaking in the grass, shrink of throat and heart won't pass your ditch-ripe cheeks, your pastel heat. Palustra is a marsh, but if you're classed by where you come from, you're the edge that meets the soften. You're the coughing of blossom giving way to wood, woven leaves, no sleeves, a shallow. Pink is an afterthought. Peach is the leaf you brought, your fleshy soft and outer, your hard and nutless butter. Nothing in that isn't soft, nothing out that isn't soft. Nothing in that isn't soft, nothing out that isn't soft. Stitch a sunset using ditches. Stitch a life using peaches. See it grow. In the marshes, no one knows what patterns. Peak, little quilt of heat. Fingertips dust sleep. Palustra, palustra creeps along the marrow, weaving pinks of mallow in the flushes. Butter blushes.
Okay, so I'm taking it that worked and that you enjoyed the poem. That was Elizabeth Jane Burnett. Maybe we'll put a link in a second so you can check out some of her other work as well. And then I think, Jamie, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, I mean, tough act to follow that. I love that poem so much. But yeah, I've just got a few sort of short poems about peat and things, which I'm gonna read to you now. So this is the first one. Peat is layers of life beneath a layer for life. A lair for tiny spinning things, for buzzing and the flapping wings of birds, for the green absorbing everything. The plants, sun sticking to their skin, who dizzy crystal flowers. The moss who sops a shaggy squelch and birth explodes pink pellets everywhere. Peat is gristled toenail dirt, which over thousands and another 1,000 years to come constructs itself from these, like trees, except instead of rotting, leaching back the smoky stuff into the sky we stinked it into, peat holds it underwater, molds it underwater, folds it like a soggy paper aeroplane or the corner of a mushy page, and doesn't let go. So this is another poem, the second one. I haven't done titles for all of these. Knee deep in heath, his scales are tipped. With boots now saturated, leaning forward springs a pool around his laces, which capillary the water back onto the peat. Slow, tiny pressure through the toes is buried under churning worlds, is a staring, swaying figure. This broad roughness of the bog beach is how weather sees us. A double take, recalling four-legged, woollier things. A sigh, and in another stride is 50 miles away. Clouds are gathering the volunteer party under them, who walk back over the peatland, confused, rechecking the forecast, and make the sun go doubly in for Parata piscatorius spiders sheltering in sphagnum stems beneath their boots. And this is the last poem I'll read for you this evening. I floated up a question as we stepped onto the boardwalk. Sphagnum, he answered, and spat the bubble sharp apart. A star cushion, lime bright and floatingly solid in the mud. I wobbled on with our wheelbarrow of lanky planks until we reached the spot, a little branch nib where you can sit or lie and have width breathe itself over you. Stare into its pool and find yourself standing on it. We peeled the old planks off. A gap deeped and a frog arrived. stared up and watched us help each other cope. The nails were chafed with rust. The wood slivers were moist, grey-greened and softer. Hardness relaxes itself at the mire. A fire breathed wide over the heath this summer, destroyed the boardwalk, which I hope to help rebuild as soon as possible, so I can sit on it and observe the leaves burnt autumn in July and the leafless silver birches like wet coral glowing in the ash and our solidness. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jamie. This was amazing. And I saw you got a lot of great comments in the chat. Everybody is very excited
Thanks,
for your
everyone.
work. So thank you. Sorry, I think for the Elizabeth, I shared her Twitter account, but it seems not to be available anymore. So I'm just gonna put her name so you can find her online. Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Thank you for Elizabeth as well. And yeah, so let's continue. So we have Rosie and Ben joining us today to talk a little about cultural heritage in the UK and the Irish Peatlands. So Rosie and Ben, whenever you're ready.
Okay, so yeah, I'd just like to talk a little bit about archaeology. We've had a couple of references to archaeology already. The title of the talk, such as it has one, is this: the last light and the dew of heaven. The dew of heaven is actually a quote from an ecologist writer who was writing in the 19th century, and that's a term referring to how bogs receive their moisture supply, the dew of heaven. So I suppose I usually, when I talk about peatland archaeology and when myself and Rosie present on this, it's usually doesn't usually have a very happy ending. I'm going to try and change that a little bit tonight. That said, some of the content here comes with I suppose a warning in some ways. Anyway, if anyone wants to tweet, by the way, our Twitter handles are there. Feel free to tweet away. There's nothing. If you want to take images, any pictures, please. There's nothing here that's confidential or under embargo. So yeah. Just by the way, that image on the front there, that is a recreation of an artifact from a peatland. That's the Balahulis goddess. I'm going to say a little bit more about her and that project work towards the end of this talk. Not sure how long I've got. I've got about 15 minutes. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So in the past, when I've talked about peatland archaeology, I often begin with this image, which confuses people. This is, of course, Cinderella. For many years, it's kind of felt like when we talk about peatlands, and in recent years in particular, when we talk in terms of technical language, such as peatland ecosystem services, archaeology often gets forgotten. We've had it mentioned, Clifton mentioned it earlier. So I sometimes refer to this as the Cinderella Syndrome. And this has been an issue for us. Has the situation changed recently in terms of perhaps some of the more grim reading about peatland archaeology and what has happened to peatland archaeology through time? Kind of yes and no is the answer to that. Matt mentioned this earlier, actually. This was in the paper on Sunday in the Tory Graph. Sorry, the Telegraph. That was an honest mistake, that was, ladies and gentlemen. The Telegraph. This is a piece, actually, this is a development just down the road from where I'm from originally in Manchester. This is a peatland, an area of peatland in Cheshire that's being developed for housing. Quite why you do that, I don't know. And again, there's been a lot of discussion about this. And not least, one of the angles in this is the site is very close to Lindo Moss, which is, of course, where the Lindo man, the Iron Age bog body, you can see his head there. Of course, you can see him in the British Museum. And this headline, I suppose, brings up something that where we see an intersection or a linkage between heritage and the future of peatland archaeology and archaeological deposits in peatlands and climate change and other forms of scientific record that we can obtain from peatlands. And to kind of take a step back, I was thinking about this talk earlier, and I was kind of slightly shocked to discover that it's over 10 years since the first phase of the IUCN Peatland scientific reviews, and this is the one that I led and was involved in, Peatlands and Historic Environment. That's 11 years ago now. Again, have things changed since then? I'm going to come back to that. In some ways they have, but just as a map here as well, just a couple of the sites I'm going to mention in passing. I'm going to say a little bit about the Somerset Levels. I'm going to mention in passing the Humberhead Levels. And I'm going, what else am I going to mention? Dartmoor down here as well in the southwest. So that's just a kind of locators really. So mainly some of our lowland bogs. I'm going to mention in passing some archaeological work in upland peatland environments. So again, kind of coming out of the IUCN work, and again, I think this is a testimony to the both the IUCN Peatland programme and Historic England, who, when the Peatland programme was launched, I think the realisation was that we needed to get the historic environment, if we want to call it that, onto the agenda, particularly archaeology, but not just archaeology, records of environmental change that we obtain from peatlands, pollen records, plant macrofossil remains, all these kind of records that tell us about environmental change, climatic change, of course, extremely important, the records we obtain from bogs on that front. And more recently, also the intersection of this with the information that can provide in terms of peatland restoration, conservation ecology, and I suppose something that relates to all this in the current context, and that is rewilding. And these records are extremely important in terms of rewilding, in terms of baselines, exactly what exact baselines we might be rewilding to, not just for peatlands, for other environments as well, for that matter. And I also think, I think I'm right in saying this volume that came out of the work of the IUCN was, I think, the first time we saw an explicit link between peatland archaeology and ecosystem services. So to an extent that was a good thing, and it kind of got certain issues on the agenda. So here's the kind of less cheery part of all this. We know, obviously, the fate of peatlands dictates the fate of archaeological sites and finds within peatlands, and there's various examples we might use of this. Most recently, the work at Starcar, an extremely iconic prehistoric archaeological site within peatlands in the Vale of Pickering, completely dewatered, or the water that is in the peat there is so acidic, the organic archaeological remains are literally disintegrating in the ground. And there's other examples we might pull up here. There's a site that we worked on Hatfield Moors, the lowland peat bog in North Lincolnshire in eastern England. And you can see that site under excavation, what remains of it, what's not been destroyed by peat cutting or affected by desiccation after exposure of the site before it was discovered. And again, this goes back really into the early 2000s and before, when Richard Brunning observed this peatland archaeology to the Somerset Levels, the well-proven, extensive and rapid destruction of waterlogged archaeological deposits in European peatlands should be regarded as a significant crisis. And if we look quickly at the Somerset Levels and the work that was done in Somerset Levels, so Historic England funded a programme of work called MARISP, Monuments at Risk in Somerset's Peatlands, that was intended to look at the peatland archaeological record from Somerset Levels, which is the most important area in England in terms of the known peatland archaeological record, at least. Two iconic sites in here, using iconic a lot, but many of these wetland sites are. That's the Neolithic sweet track on the right there, Neolithic timber pathway, footpath, you want to call it that across the levels. And just bottom left there, we have a reconstruction or a reimagining of the Glastonbury Iron Age lake village there, again, another wetland site. So the peatlands in the Somerset Levels are kind of really full of archaeology. But what this work, the MARISP work, shows us is really the parlous state of much of this archaeology. The lake settlement of Mere, which is kind of a companion site to Glastonbury, is not in great nick, it's degrading. The Glastonbury Lake village is slightly better, but still has problems. And again, I'm not going to pull you through this graphic, but this shows some of the archaeological sites in Somerset through time. So going back to the bottom there, that's the earliest, the sweep track in the Neolithic, which was built in the Neolithic. I'm think I'm right in saying that the only section of the sweep track that appears to be not deteriorating is the section in the National Nature Reserve where water tables are kept high by pumping. So many other of these sites are degrading or have been destroyed either directly by peat cutting or by dewatering. The irony, of course, of this is, in theory, some of these sites are meant to be protected through various vehicles, whether that's scheduling or other instruments, if you like. There's no point having these kind of protections if the peatland is being affected by indirect kind of pressures such as drainage or acidification and so forth. How am I doing for time? So if we look more broadly, what's kind of changed since 2010 or where have we got? We've seen, again, this is actually going back to 1990, that's previous to that, the discovery of the White Horse Cyst there. That's a Bronze Age burial on Dartmoor in southwest England. You can see the cyst there under excavation. You can see the blanket peat grew up around that. It led to remarkable preservation of the contents of the cyst. Again, we could have an entire talk, a discussion of the marvelous kind of finds that came out of that site. I'm not going to go into that now. That was published in this volume preserved in the peat. We've also seen some very good work coming out of Exmoor. The work on Exmoor has in many ways been a kind of an exemplar of what we can do, or what we can do where we get collaborations between the historic environment and peatland restoration and rehabilitation programs. There have been some issues with that we won't really go into now, but that provides us with one example of what we might call kind of best practice. And that's something hopefully we can extend to other peatland projects, not least as we've heard referred to already, the DEFRA projects, the peat pilots that will be happening. And there's other reasons to be optimistic in terms of some of that work as well. If we look more broadly, these issues of destruction and loss of peatland and wetland records, for that matter, more broadly, this is not just a problem in England. I'm not going to say anything about Ireland, where the situation, if anything, is slightly worse. I've talked about that a lot recently. I'm even depressed myself even more. But again, this is some recent work from last year, from some work in Scandinavia, reassessment of a peatland site, an important Mesolithic site. And what that's established based on work that's been carried out at the site since in the 1940s, 1970s, and more recently in 2019. So some remarkable organic Mesolithic artifacts in that peatland. And the conclusions that the authors of this report draw is that, you can see that there. The archaeology is disintegrating. It's not being preserved in situ. And a quote here for you: "We need a plan how to stop or deal with ongoing accelerated deterioration on a broad international scale, and we need to consider if we can and should excavate these threatened sites now while they still have organic preservation." This is a key point, everyone, and we might be able to re-wet peatlands and restore some form of ecosystem services. Once archaeology is gone and degraded, that doesn't work. We can't re-wet this site. Those artifacts will not stabilize themselves or anything's left in the ground. It might slow down some degradation, but even the science behind that is unclear. So this is really important when it comes to peatland restoration and rehabilitation. It's the last chance for what remains. And that's not to put too fine a point on it. It really is. Particularly in Ireland, we've seen a wholesale destruction of peatland sites with minimal investigation. Whatever remains to us in whatever bogs we're rehabilitating, this is the last chance for it. And that's no exaggeration. So, in theory, rehabilitation and restoration should be good for archaeological sites and deposits. It should be. However, this is something that has to be carried out with some attention paid to the potential presence of archaeological remains. And not just the archaeological remains, the peat itself provides the paleoenvironmental record. So even where we don't have cultural archaeology, we still have that value and importance. And it's critical that is brought into these restoration and rehabilitation programs. We need, and this is a plea, we need the help and support of the broader community to do this. There's been too few of us for too long trying to bang this drum, and all the time we fall between stools. The heritage communities themselves, incidentally, have not been great with this either, but we need people to get on board with us now. Otherwise, what does remain may not remain much longer. And as I say, just to clarify that, restoration, it should be beneficial. That said, I've heard some reasonable horror stories from Ireland recently about certain work. Anyway. And we have other kind of, I suppose, leverage, and we've scored some kind of successes in terms of some of these issues on a broader international scale. So last year we put a submission in, Wet Future's put in a submission to the United Nations Human Rights Commission report on climate change, culture and cultural rights. And they picked up on some of this, and particularly some of the issues around climate change and the impact of that, not just on people's livelihoods, but people's heritage as well. So again, this relates to some of what I'm talking about here. And again, I'm not going to pull you through that quote there, but this is different sides of the same coin, if you like. So we need to score kind of hits at different levels with this, from the community all the way up to policy and practice as well. Okay, so to finish off, how are we doing for time? Okay, not so bad. So to finish off, this has been alluded to already. So often I think one problem, and we have made a lot of progress on this recently, is how we sell peatlands and peatland rehabilitation to the public, for want of a better word. Okay, bogs, the wet places, they do occupy a place, and we've heard some poetry there. You know, Seamus Heaney springs to mind. We've talked about him before. Literature in Ireland is full of bogs and that kind of cultural context. So we do have cultural connections there. However, when it comes to talking about the science of peatlands, in particular carbon sequestration, it's easy to lose people quite quickly. Ecosystem services, again, that kind of switches people off straight away. We're missing a trick, I think, in terms of how we use cultural heritage and archaeology more broadly, in terms of connecting people to these landscapes. Now, of course, we have biodiversity, and we have the other aspects, I suppose, of the, want of a better word, natural environment that we can use in here. Archaeology has in many ways been underused. So this is a plea and a bit of a promotion. How might we do that? So we've been involved in some bits of work over the last 4 or 5 years. So this is to bring us back to the Balahulis goddess. Balahulis goddess is a wooden idol figurine, Iron Age, placed in a peat bog in Scotland, and discovered in the 19th century, end of the 19th century. She now resides in Edinburgh in the museum, and you can see in bottom left there. She dried out, so that slightly haunting figure you can see there. Originally, she was fuller in figure, shall we say. So a project I've been involved in a couple of years ago, we went back to Balahulis, and working with a woodworker and with the community, we remade a replica of the Balahulis goddess, and that's the Balahulis goddess under crafting there by Mark Griffiths, fantastic woodworker. And the way she operated after that, we left her with the community. They've actually reburied her in a bog. So they have a Balahulis goddess for the 21st century. Before that, she made a tour of local schools. You can see her there. And she became a vehicle, if you like, for discussing all sorts of subjects around heritage, not least around peatlands, you know, why this material preserves in bogs. That leads us into ways of talking about some of the really important things we've heard about today from Clifton and from Matt. We need to link up these conversations, and we need to think about the ways we do that. And to be clear, there is some very good work with this going on at the moment from different groups as well. Other stuff we've done as well, Project Wildscape is a project I've been involved in, again, working up on Hatfield Moors with colleagues from Glasgow, Nikki Whitehouse, Henry Chapman from Birmingham. We've also, as a broader part of that project, worked with the Isle of Axholme and Hatfield Chase Landscape Partnership. And again, this has been an experimental archaeological project that's involved the community. So I showed you earlier on, you might remember the picture top left, that's the Neolithic trackway under excavation. the partnership set up a project to remake a replica of that Neolithic site, and became known as the Community of Builders. And that project ran over a number of weeks. It involved different colleagues from different sectors of archaeology who came in and also talked about different aspects of heritage. And it became a way, again, to talk about peatlands and to connect communities back to this landscape. So I'm just going to finish off, if I may, with, have I got time? I think so. The short video, if it's going to work. Okay, so that was a short bit of footage of the open day that we held on Hatfield Moors to open, if you like, the trackway, the reconstruction of the Neolithic trackway. It was an event that brought in many different stakeholders from the community. It brought in, as you can see, many different age groups, and it involved some fantastic creative engagements as well. So again, this is to kind of repeat what I've said earlier. You know, we miss a trick if we don't think of ways of employing and utilising the remarkable archaeological records that we have from peatlands. I'm going to finish at that point. Hopefully what I've demonstrated is how closely the fate of peatland archaeology is tied to the fate of bogs and peatlands more broadly, and how in the longer term that should be a good thing, but the importance particularly of continued engagement, and also hopefully, as I've just talked about then, the fact that we can think of different ways of using the historic environment, the archaeological record, to open up bigger debates and discussions associated with peatlands and our relationship with these environments in the present day. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. It was really interesting, and I think many of us got some really great points to think about. Thank you very much. Thank you for Rosie as well for joining us. So we want to promote and appraise the work of local groups. So we are happy to have 4 of them represented here today. So first we have Jane from Peatland Connections, Abby from the Ken Project, Sora from the Forest of Bowland, and Jack and Dana from the Welsh Race Bogs. So yeah, we can just go in this order, and Jane, you're up.
Thank you, and thanks very much for having me. Sorry about the scary light here. I tend to have lamps in the room, and I've just ended up getting the lamps so that you can see me a little bit. So thanks very much. It's really interesting listening to everybody talking and hearing what's going on, and yeah, we're all sort of coming together for a shared purpose, really. So I'd just like to share my screen. I'm just going to give you a brief outline of Peatland Connections and what we're doing and what we're thinking about doing in the future as well. So if I go back to the top here. Okay, is that sharing my screen okay? Great, thank you.
Yes.
So Peatland Connections is a project. We're based in Dumfries and Galloway in the southwest of Scotland. And we are a project that is bringing together arts and culture. So we're looking to connect people back to their local peatlands, mainly in the Galloway Glens area, which is in the heart of Dumfries and Galloway. That's our main peatland project area. But we're also looking outward and hoping to connect with other peatland groups, not just in this country, but around the world. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that we've realised over this last year, that we may be quite far away in distance, but we can quite easily connect through our computers and online through social media. So it's been a way of us connecting, and I'm hoping that we can also utilise that in this project and really connect people up. So even though it's just based in the Galloway Glens area, we're hoping to connect everyone else up from lots of other different areas. So the project has quite a few different aspects. The main one is connection. So it's connection to the local community and the local stakeholders, connection to other people who are involved in peatland restoration, other peatland groups, and also people, members of the public who know nothing about peatlands. And that's still, there's quite a lot of people that still don't know a lot about peatlands. And for me, that's probably got to be one of the biggest challenges of this project, is to really try and bring people on board who are not already involved or are not already aware of how important peatlands really are to us. So I've actually put this up. This is one of the Instagram posts that I put up, and I'm doing it in a rolling thing each week. So I'm doing engage, inspire and inform. And these posts here that are giving information are getting the highest engagement. People are really loving these snippets of information. So that's been really quite interesting, watching what people are engaging with as well. So yeah, we're trying to put things out on social media. So we're using Twitter, Facebook and Instagram just to get the message out there, be inspiring, try and be a little bit fun, so that people are like, what is this? What are these peatlands? What are they talking about? Let's tell us a little bit more. So connection's the key, and it's the thread that goes throughout the whole project. We're also looking to do events and workshops. We've started off in lockdown, so it's been quite difficult to get out and do that, but we've got an event coming up soon with Galloway Glens where we're doing a talk, and I'm being joined by an archaeologist and also Emily Taylor, who is our peatland expert at the Crichton Carbon Centre. I should say also, I am not a peatland expert. My expertise is in, I'm a photographer, videographer, I'm a drone operator. My background in environment is in construction, so it's a very different place. But I bring a lot of other skills to the table for this project. So at the Galloway Glens, it's on the 28th of April, we're doing a talk there. So there's myself, Emily, who's our peatland expert. We have an archaeologist, and we also have an artist, the lovely Kate Foster, who is with us this evening as well. So we are going to be talking around peatlands, and the theme throughout that is going to be drainage. So it'll be hopefully a very interesting talk. So yeah, once we can start sort of moving around and getting out and about again, we really want to get some events and workshops going. And we're going to bring in experts. Kate's going to do a workshop for us. And one of the things that we want is, we don't want it to be just talking about peatlands. We really want to get people out on the peat. And if they can't get out in the peat, we want to bring it into their homes. So I want to do videos, and I want to do drone footage where I'm taking people out there and go, look at this amazing place. So access can sometimes be an issue, and also we don't want lots of people out in the peat because we don't want to be doing any damage. So whatever we can bring into their home is absolutely great, and that's kind of how we're hoping to connect people as well. So some events and workshops that'll be hopefully very good. Another aspect is the water quality monitoring that we're going to do. We want to try and again engage the community and do a sort of citizen science for water quality monitoring, and we're hoping that that will continue on once the project's finished as well. We've also already done a couple of commissions. We're hoping to do commissions over the 3 years of the project, where we're commissioning artists, musicians to work with something that came up in the theme. The project's got to be quite organic in the way that it grows. So as it grows and as things come up through our steering group, we will think, okay, maybe we need to commission this, or maybe we need to think about this, and it will grow organically like that. So I wanted to really start the project off with a couple of commissions. So we commissioned Kate to do our beautiful logo there, because we thought we want something to really represent what the project's about. And it's a beautiful piece of cotton grass, and it's just absolutely gorgeous, and it completely represents what this project's about. And we also had Alan do a piece of music. So if you go to our website, you'll see both of those. The music starts as you open up the website, and it's experiential. It's not just one-dimensional. There's so many aspects to this project. So commissions are going to be a big part of it. And there are two other parts of the project that we are constantly thinking about. They're in the back of our mind. One is the land use informing tool that we're hoping to develop at the end of the project, but it's in our mind there all the time, and we're thinking, okay, how can we work towards this? What's coming up in the project that will help inform this? And it's really looking at natural capital and defining what natural capital really means within this area, and helping to have indicators that will help inform land use in the future. So we're really hoping that there's a real practical aspect to this as well. So that's in the back of our mind. And the other thing is that at the end of the project, we're also going to have an exhibition. And the exhibition will tell the complete story of Peatland Connections and the project, and how it's grown over the 3 years. It will be from beginning to end. We're not quite sure how it's going to look yet, because we're not quite sure what the content of the project is going to be yet. But it will be everything from the songs that we've had written and that people have shared with us, to poems, like the lovely poems that we heard tonight. I really hope you share those with us, because that's something that we can add in. Everything that has been brought together with the project will be a travelling exhibition. That's one of our main focuses at the end. So we've also had a steering group, which we thought was really important, because if you don't have a lot of voices around the table from different backgrounds, you're not getting that rounded discussion. So we have an archaeologist, we have artists, we have people from community groups, we have fisheries, we've got forestry people, ecologists, and we had our first steering group recently. I think it's last week or the week before, and the discussion was absolutely amazing. There was so much has came out of it. One of the things that I can tell you about is we had a conversation around the language on peatlands and how people talk about them. And depending on where you sit within the peatland community, we speak about peatlands in different ways. So some people are very technical, and some people are very descriptive, and there's a whole language around peatlands. So we're going to develop a peatland dictionary that takes all of this into account, and we really want everybody to join in that conversation and tell us.
I don't want to interrupt you, but we would have to leave some room for the other speakers.
Oh, of course, I'm sorry.
You can just try to wrap it up. Yeah,
of course, yeah.
Sorry, thank you.
No problem. So we've got a Peatland sharing space, and it's on Facebook, and please do follow us. And if you follow us, and we would love to follow you back and connect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. Sorry for the interruption, but yeah, we are running short on time.
Not at all. I'm sorry. I was giving it on.
Okay, so Abby, please, if you can tell us more about the CAN project.
So my name's Abby McSherry, and I work with the CAN project on a variety of upland and lowland bog sites in Northern Ireland. B word in the title here is the border in Ireland, which we don't mention. Makes for interesting working, but it's the main reason why the project exists. Nature knows no borders, but sadly nature conservation legislation does. So some places we have a site that's protected, and then just meters away, it's got a completely different set of rules and regulations and protection affecting it. So this provides a whole range of challenges that the partnership faces. But we are a partnership, and as you can see, we've got lots of partners, all bringing different strengths to the partnership and working with each other very successfully. And it's been the most amazing experience working with this group of scientists and diggers and people and artists, and just everybody has been fantastic to work with. So we have 35 people employed, working right across 11 project partners, and we'll hopefully be still here in June next year. We do cover Scotland and Ireland and Northern Ireland, but I'm just going to talk about Northern Ireland today. So we've got 10 peatland sites that we work on, 8 are lowland raised bogs, and the 2 upland blanket bog sites are actually cross-border into the Republic of Ireland as well. Our lowland raised bog sites are, although we call them a site, they're actually made up of a little cluster of mostly small bogs. So each site has got a number of smaller bogs associated with it. The sites are Peatlands Park, Moneygall Bog, Garry Bog, Ballinahoan, Ferrywater Bogs, Tully and Cranny, which is pictured here in this slide. So each site is unique and has its own management. But overall, our work consists of blocking drains using either plastic dams or building dams using the peat itself. And you can see in this picture, the drain has been blocked across the middle of the image with peat. And just a month later, this is the water levels that we're looking at. And that site remained wet right the way through a very dry summer. So highly successful. We're trying to raise water levels to within 10 centimetres of the ground level for 90% of the year. That's our aim. We're also removing alien invasives like rhododendron, busy turning that into high quality charcoal. And on some sites, we're experimenting with planting sphagnum and doing other sort of smaller projects depending on what's needed on each individual site. Our challenges, major challenges in the work has been practical, like this picture shows. It was taken from a YouTube video that you should definitely watch if you want to laugh. It's our digger getting lost in the bog. They're quite graphically just demonstrated, but I couldn't share that because I didn't have time. We've had diggers getting stuck. We've had to bring bog mats out onto the bog, each weighing half a ton, but each half a ton piece of wood enables us to spread the weight of the digger, so they actually float on the surface. We've also been working with contractors, and they've actually developed new equipment, plastic lightweight wheels to help them get around the bog. So lots of new initiatives going on. And of course, one of our major challenge, our friendly little viral pal, which has meant we've not been able to do very many face-to-face events on the bogs like we were wanting to do. It's also meant that we've had lockdown where we've not been allowed out onto the bog. and we've had infection in our team and in our contractors. We've had digger drivers falling sick and not being able to complete projects. So it's been quite interesting. And we were wondering how we would manage to complete the project, but we recently just got the good news through from our funders, Interreg, that they will allow us to extend the calendar period of our project. They're not giving us any more money, but we are able to finish the project in June 2022 instead of December 2021. So our achievements on the lowland wet bogs are generally very good. We've had really excellent buy-in from the landowners. They would like a mechanism for payment. They would like to be paid for farming the carbon and managing the wetlands, obviously. The neighbours for the sites we're working on have been really positive about someone finally looking after their bogs as they see them. And one of our fears that there would be a perception of increased flooding risk hasn't materialised. Nobody seems to be at all concerned about that. We've had no queries raised about this. Everyone seems quite confident that the wetlands can take the water and look after it safely. So we finished working on half our lowland sites. We're almost finished another 3, and the remaining 2 will be done during our extension period. So our upland blanket bog sites, like here at Culca and Nearan in Sligo, Fermanagh, we're doing, again, very, very big, grand, sexy projects with helicopters and coir logs and blocking large areas of wetland and raising the water level. You can see the picture on the left here shows where those buns and those coir logs have been placed into the wetland around Lochotona. And because it all was very high tech and, you know, helicopters and grand and dramatic, we got lots of really good coverage for that from the BBC. So we've done that major project, and also we have reprofiled lots of eroded hags up on those sites. We've completed 50 hectares of restoration, as I said, using drain blocking and reprofiling, and there have been really observable differences. We haven't been able to, we haven't really had time to research the biological differences and the botanical differences yet, but we are confident that they will come as the sites settle into their new water levels. We have done a lot of work. The works were carried out by the landowners themselves. We trained them with the help of the Mournes Heritage Trust, and those skill sets will remain local. We didn't have to bring experts in from elsewhere. We trained the landowners to look after their own bogs, so that was absolutely fantastic. We've also done a lot of LiDAR survey work to plan future projects on the site. So we have, you know, shovel-ready projects. We also have more high-level, well, if the money was there in the future, this would be a nice thing to do. This could be covered by that. But we've got real shovel-ready projects ready to go as soon as more money turns up, and hopefully it will. On our other cross-border upland site at Slieve Bay in Monaghan, Fermanagh, Tyrone, we've basically been doing first aid on a bog that was bleeding to death. But it really is working. The patient is on the road to recovery in the sites where we've done that work. And we've used the metaphor of the first aid for bogs quite repeatedly in this area, and it's got a lot of traction. A lot of people enjoy that idea of putting a plaster on the bog and making it all better, stitching it up and mending it. We've also done very practical moo cow shaped things to improve the land. We've put fences up and enabled the local farmer to reintroduce one of his favourite livestock, the Dexter cattle, onto the uplands, and the grazing of those wetland sites is progressing brilliantly, and that is helping to reduce the fire load on the mountain to prevent future burns. And on the subject of burning, we're also doing wildfire planning on both of those upland sites with Pal Costa Foundation. So is that the end? Did I do my 5 minutes? Did I keep within my 5 minutes? I hope so.
A little bit more, but
I'm sorry. But we
fine.
hope it's not the end. We hope that we will be applying for more money, and in our dreams we have Peatlands for Peatlands, which will be a necklace across the border of Ireland of wetlands right the way across, linking peat and peace. So that's me.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you for the great work you are doing. Sorry for running over time, but
no, I'm sorry
I don't want to interrupt.
No, I'm sorry. I tried to make it quick.
And thank you very much. And yeah, I will just give it over to you, Sarah, from the Forest of Bowland.
Thank you. Sorry, Bethany. Hi, my name's Sarah Robinson. I'm the Farming and Wildlife Officer within the Forest of Bowland AOMB. I want to tell you a little bit about the work that we have been doing over the last decade, restoring upland peat. Just bear with me for 1 sec. So we are in the Forest of Bowland, which is in Lancashire. I want to tell you a little bit about the reasons behind the habitat degradation that we have in this area. Talk a little bit about nailing the scale of the problem and catching the cash to do something about it. To tell you about the restoration action we have undertaken and the progress we've made, and then touching a little bit at the end about peat and people. Some of the other speakers have talked about this, and I want to tell you about some of the projects that we're involved with.
There we go. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so let's from here. Oops. So yeah, we have the UK peatlands on the left and the Forest of Bowland peatland on the right, deep in pink. So why are these upland moorlands so special? They contain large areas of blanket bog and heathland habitats, and we have a specific set of upland bird species as well as scarce and specialist plant species. They're a huge carbon store, the source of the 3 major watercourses in the area, drinking water catchment held by United Utilities, and they're known and valued upland landscapes. The specialist plants include things like Andromeda, which is the bog rosemary on the left, on the right, the teeny tiny cranberry, and in the middle there, the purple ling heather that's out in August. Obviously, they contain a lot of sphagnum mosses, capillifolium on the left and cuspidatum on the right, or possibly, I haven't got my notes, apologies. I'm rushing. Cleodonia species are also really common. We go up to about 570 meters, so we start to get these more northern species, as well as specialist invertebrates. We have a green hair-streaked butterfly on the left-hand side. I love his stripy antennae, and you can see how tiny he is, and the emperor moths on the right-hand side. So peatland within the Forest of Bowland have been degrading for a long time. This picture was taken in 1907 and is the result of pollution damage from industrial towns of Blackburn and Preston. Anything which causes damage to the vegetation results in damage to the peat and a loss of peat through resulting erosion. So this can be pollution, drainage, fire, overgrazing, trampling, and changes in climate. So we had that picture there taken more than a century ago. This is a picture taken just a couple of years ago, and so you can see the deep gullying within the peat. We have areas of open, bare peat pans, and you can see here on the right-hand side the dissolved peat in the water there running off the peat. So what we did to start with in 2013 was I was employed to undertake an assessment of the peatland across the AOMB to find out where restoration work was needed. And there's just a couple of tables from that report. So down to each individual fell, we were looking at whether they were gripped, which is man-made drainage, whether they had eroding gullies, which are natural watercourses that have started to erode, whether there were areas of bare peat, and the percentage of bare peat within those areas, and then ideas around where we could look for funding. In other areas, you can see in the green, there were areas which were in really quite good condition. So this is all SSSI, which is interesting coming on from the talks about policy earlier. Totally concur that just because it's SSSI doesn't mean to say it's in good condition. So since 2012, we now have 19 separate sites under restoration, covering 755 hectares, with an investment of £2.5 million. This isn't a project so much as a way of working, and having the priority peat work has given us a framework to look for funding. And as the AOMB, we are the facilitators of that funding, doing the work on the ground with the contractors, pulling the specifications for the work together, and then letting the contracts with funding from other bodies. And we will use whatever driver is fashionable at the time. So we used biodiversity, water quality, carbon storage, sequestration, flood management, or a combination of those drivers. We work in partnership with whoever will work in partnership with us, and whoever has got a fund open at the time. We're part of the Pennine Peat Life project. That's a £8 million project. We also work with the Environment Agency locally at the other end of the scale. If they have any underspend, then we will quite happily spend that for them. So it's a real mishmash of funding pots, but the thing that pulls it together is having the AOMB there as the facilitator. I'm really conscious of time, so I'm just going to whiz through. These are just some examples of grit blocking on the right and grit blocking on the left and gully blocking on the right using peat dams. We use timber dams. This is all about slowing the flow. This pair of pictures was amazingly taken 3 months apart and show the skills of the operators in the excavators, reprofiling the gully edges, putting in the peat dams, and how I just think it's amazing how quickly that restoration has started to take effect. We use Koya, especially where there are areas of sheet wash and erosion. So these are the same sites 3 years apart. We protect the bare peat sometimes using brash on the left, but also geotextile on the right where we don't have the brash available, and that's seeded underneath. You can see the line that goes down with the seed on the left-hand side. And we seed in sphagnum as well on the right-hand side. You can see that's sphagnum phalanx. And we use volunteers to help with plug planting these sites as well. So there's lots of things going on. But one of the things that we've been doing more recently is about making connections between peat and people. So we use volunteers a lot. These volunteers were all age 10. And we had it's a very small school. That is the whole of the junior school. So yeah, they were age 8 to 11, this group, and they were heading off to do some sphagnum seeding for us. We've had stone dam building competitions, photo monitoring, and lots of conversations up on the hill with people. This is a project that I worked on, but it's as part of our Pendle Hill project. We have an artist in residence for each project. So I had an artist in residence, Kerry Morrison, and she works for In Situ, and her job was to help me communicate the importance of peat to the general public, because I'm a technician and a scientist, and I can make people glaze over really quickly. So this was around asking people to take plug plants up to the top of Pendle Hill and then plant them themselves. And that was really fantastic. And we had lots and lots of conversations because people were literally bringing us the plug plants. It was great. And then one of the other things that we did working with Kerry, I was trying to explain the peat restoration process. And because we're in Lancashire and the regional dish of Lancashire is of course anything in a pie. So this is peat pie and it represents peat restoration. So it's curry and chips because we're in Lancashire. The chips represent the coir logs that we use. The curry is a brown dal, which represents the peat itself, and then it has a spinach layer on top, which represents the restoration work that we're doing. So that was a really fab idea, and I just wanted to explain a little bit about, thanks to working with an artist, I was able to think outside the box a little bit and see that there are lots and lots of different ways of engaging with people, and the more fun and off the wall it can be, the better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you. Really interesting. But we have to just kind of rush on, unfortunately. So Jack and Dana, sorry that you have been in the last moment, but hope.
So I'm Jack. I work for Natural Resources Wales as part of the New Life for Welsh Raised Bogs project. We're also joined by Dana, and she's going to tell you a bit about the Welsh Government funded National Peatland Action Programme.
So I'm just very quickly going to just give you a bit of the context here in Wales. So in 2019, the Welsh Government declared a climate change emergency. And then last year, this led to the creation of the first National Peatland Action Programme in Wales. And this is a nationally coordinated restoration programme with a dedicated team and significant core funding. And you can read the 6 priority themes on the slide there in front of you. So peatlands extend over an estimated 4% of the Welsh landscape, supporting many important habitats and species. And in the last few years, projects have taken place in Wales with the aim of restoring these important habitats. And our project, the Life Welsh Raised Bogs project, is one of those projects. And we also now feed into the National Peatland Action Programme. So I'm going to just hand over to Jack, who's going to give you an intro about the project and what we're aiming to achieve. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Dana. So as part of the New Life Welsh Raised Bogs project, we're working on 7 lowland raised bog sites across Wales that are all currently in unfavourable conservation status. We're undertaking the large-scale delivery of restoration actions to bring sites into favourable condition. 2 main sites are Cwrs Fochnod north of Aberystwyth and Cwrs Caron, and that's where the majority of our work's taking place. We're a £5.5 million project, and there are 8 of us delivering the project. Lowland raised bog in Wales, you can see the All Wales Peatland map on the right-hand side. The dots are the remaining lowland raised bog sites in Wales. There's less than 40 left, and only 3 of these are greater than 50 hectares in size. Normally we talk a little bit more about the peatland biodiversity, but to keep it short and sweet, you can see a carpet of sphagnum in the upper picture, and that's as close to pristine condition habitat that's known in the UK. One key thing to probably talk about, different to the uplands, lowland peatlands have a significant peat depth. Cwrs Caron, we've got an 11 metre peat depth, Cwrs Fochnod, 8 metres. Our sites, we're very fortunate our sites haven't suffered to commercial peat extraction, while sites have been extensively impacted in the past by domestic peat cutting and marginal drainage. Coles Vochno and Coles Carron represent some of the best examples of low and raised bog in the UK. There are some of the other southern sites. You've got Windee near Abergavenny, you've got the limestone escarpment around the site, and this site has one of the best examples, or the only remaining known lag stream, so that's the marginal habitat that adjoins on to a raised bog in the UK. So the background behind the project is all of the SAC, low and raised bog, wholly in Wales, is in unfavourable condition. And that all of that SAC low and raised bog is part of our projects. Actions delivered as part of the project are going to restore over 900 hectares into favourable conservation status. So how and what are we actually going to deliver to achieve favourable conservation status? The main key action is 72 kilometres of peat bunds. You can see the pictures of that on the left-hand side. And the purpose behind these is to intercept the drainage or water loss in the upper surface of the peat, the upper 1 metre. And that has been caused by the peat becoming more degraded, caused by marginal drainage. A lot of work has been undertaken in the past, over the last 40 years, on the two main sites, and there's going to be 34 kilometres of bund reprofiling of a different type of bund that are much larger, 2 metres wide, a metre high, and a lot of scrubbers established on those. They've cracked and don't hold water like they used to. So that's one of the other key project actions. One of the influences, or one of the impacts of drainage, is the overdominance of Molinia, or purple moorgrass. This outcompetes and smothers the natural bog plants that you'd find on a good condition bog. We've purchased a wetland harvester, you can see on screen there, called a piston bully, to mow and remove these large, robust tussocks of grass. Hydrological restoration alone probably wouldn't reduce the growth rate as much as is needed. A follow-up action to mowing is grazing on marginal drier areas, and now we've got some, I say, very good-looking cows. Another impact of drainage is scrub establishment on 5 of the sites. We're planning to treat and remove 32 hectares of dense scrub that you see on the right-hand side, and 438 hectares of scattered scrub. Scrub or small trees on peat amplifies and worsens water loss through a process called evapotranspiration. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time. I'm gonna, but we have a monitoring contract with the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. One of the key and easy aspects of the monitoring work we do is monitoring the hydrology. Vegetation is very slow to grow and change, but that is a different aspect. Planning the project actions around the many priority species that call the sites home so we don't adversely impact them. Use of earth observation, so they've got some LiDAR and some contours that we use to inform the best location for our peat bunds. Don't be afraid to give us a follow on social media. If you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the question box or give us a tweet or a message on Facebook. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for Chuck and Dana. And thank you all. We're sorry that we ran a bit late. I guess it was a bit organizational issue as well, so we'll try to test better for next time. I'm afraid we won't have much time for discussion this time. but we are gonna send you a follow-up email with all the links and the video we couldn't watch today, and also feedback link. And we would really appreciate if you would fill it out. And yeah, thank you all for being here. We are really excited. And to repeat once again, there will be a session every month until the end of the year. So we are gonna have much more of interesting speakers, much more of interesting evenings coming up. So yeah, just stay tuned. Look at our webpage, our Twitter, Instagram. So yeah, I guess I'm gonna say thank you to all once again from all the RE-PEAT team, and have a nice evening, and see you in the next session in April.
Thanks everyone. Have a good evening.